Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Steve Leibowitz. The attack on October 7th was perpetrated by Hamas, but they did not act alone. Hamas was armed, instructed, and supported first and foremost by the axis of evil, the anti-US and anti-Israel Islamic extremist Iran. They may or may not have known the exact date of the Hamas rampage, but since the start of the war in Gaza, the Islamic Republic has encouraged its three H's, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, to launch attacks on Israel. The Houthis' attack on commercial shipping has gotten world attention. U.S.-led strikes on the Houthis, and now also on Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria are continuing. They've been attacking U.S. bases in the region. The U.S. has been continuing its strikes on Iranian proxies. Israel is waging a full-scale war on Hamas, and deadly cross-border warfare with Hezbollah in Lebanon is continuing. But until now, the U.S. and Israel have both refrained from military strikes directly on Iran. Might that change soon? Well, joining us to discuss the Iranian role in the war are Dr. Dan Diker, the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, an author, an analyst, Amos Asael. Amos, I want to start with you if I could. There are reports that Iran could be only weeks away from being able to produce a nuclear weapon. They are instigating attacks all over the Middle East, not to mention their role in the Russia-Ukraine war. What is the U.S. waiting for? Doesn't Iran deserve and need to be taught a lesson already?
Well, they certainly deserve it, but that doesn't mean that the wise thing to do tactically or geographically is to launch the ultimate attack that you're advocating right now and at the center of their operation, namely sovereign Iran. There is logic in saying that, in assuming that Iran's ultimate downfall will come from within, and that all of its external enemies, the ones that it so systematically collects and multiplies, in this regard, wait patiently for the Iranian people to attack the Iranian regime. In my view, that will eventually happen. This, of course, does not give anyone license to sit idly and tolerate all of Iran's provocations around the Middle East and beyond it. So I think Iran is being confronted, and that all of its rivals, certainly the United States and Israel, are making this plain and are no longer concealing their resolve to attack Iran. Does everything that I say mean that there will never be a circumstance in which it will be the right thing to do to attack Iran within its borders? Of course, I'm not saying that. But I'm not sure that this is the moment for that or that it's about to arrive anytime soon.
Dan, you are very well informed about the Iranian opposition and what they are saying about the war in Gaza. And what about those chances of bringing down the evil regime from within? Do you give it much credence?
Yes, Steve, I think it's an important observation, and just picking up on what Amos said, the ultimate success in what's called RC, in the language that the opposition uses, which is called regime change, that will come from the inside. 93% of the Iranian people, 88 million people, oppose this regime and are actually friendly to Israel and very friendly to the West.
93%? You're saying 93% would support Israel, in effect, are friendly toward Israel?
93% of the Iranian people reject the regime that oppresses them, that murders them. 600 people were executed by the Iranian regime in the first 6 months of 2023, and another 127 the second 6 months of 2023. This is a regime that's starving its own people, in which half the population lives under the poverty line, which is we've seen a major shift since the Massa revolution, in which this young woman, Mahsa Amini, was murdered by the regime for not wearing her hijab. And the regime knows that it's in a very fragile state right now. And that is why we see a major exporting of the Iranian octopus's tentacles. We see the tentacles trying to strangle Israel in Gaza, first of all, having invaded sovereign Israel, now trying to strangle Israel in Gaza as Israel is cutting off one of the long tentacles of the Iranian regime. We stand at this moment before a critical decision whether a massive attack will have to take place against the Iranian governed Lebanon, and which is dominated by the Hezbollah, which is an Iranian organization, as well as the continuation of Iranian attacks on Red Sea shipping against the United States, not to mention the Iranian-backed attacks that ended up with 3 dead American servicemen in Jordan. So the Iranian regime has acted particularly aggressively at this moment because they are so vulnerable domestically. There may be a tipping point, and it may come sooner than later with external backing that the Iranian people may be able to create a lot of unrest within Iran and cause a change, or certainly a type of political concussion that would severely weaken the regime.
All right, Amos, let me come back to you. There used to be what we would call red lines. You cross a superpower and there's hell to pay. Iran has crossed so many red lines, including that of having its proxy closing the Red Sea shipping, as was mentioned, and effectively crippling the Suez Canal at the same time. They're also flouting nuclear inspectors and moving toward weaponization. Where is the new red line? Where is the deterrence against Iran?
Well, that clearly was a red line in terms of their regional meddling. And I think that the West has responded in kind. The fact that it is, first of all, making plain that it will not tolerate any reduction in maritime traffic due to Houthi violence is a statement in its own right. And then militarily speaking, it is striking this particular provocation at its heart. In Yemen, you're asking why it doesn't go beyond the heart to the brain that is in Iran. I think that in this regard, this is not the red line that Western strategists would seek. That red line would be crossed if Iranian units, rather than Iranian proxies, attacked American targets like vessels or consulates or embassies or military units frontally and directly and in broad daylight. In that case, I think America would respond within Iran.
So they're using their proxies basically to stop the Americans from attacking them directly. Dan, I'm old enough to remember the days of friendship between Israel and Iran before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Picture, if you would, the kind of relationship Israel could have today with Iran if the people of Iran had their will.
Well, Steve, the relationship between the Persian people and the Jewish people go way back several thousand years to King Cyrus, who actually was the Persian king who, in control of Jerusalem in 514 BCE, welcomed the Jews back following their expulsion by the Babylonians 70 years earlier, and welcomed them back to pray on the Temple Mount. So there's been an ancient relationship between the Persians and the Jews. As you mentioned, the years of the Shah, as well as together with Israel, were years of cooperation. We do need to mention, though, that there were actually, after the revolution, you remember the Iran-Contra affair, there were even relations between Israel and the current regime in the 1980s, 1985, 86. However, it's very clear that this regime has branded Israel, the little Satan, the United States, as the big Satan, and this regime's doctrinally driven commitment is to destroy Israel and to destroy the big Satan, the United States, and ultimately take over the world. That is their own eschatological position. So the West has very little option but to take the decision either to destroy the brain and the heart and the tentacles of this Iranian octopus that is doing everything it can to strangle the region. And yet the forces of good, the forces of light, the forces of rationality in the region that include, by the way, many of the Arab countries are waiting to see whether Israel will overwhelmingly defeat the Hamas. And I mean overwhelmingly, as well as the Hezbollah. And then we will begin to see a pathway towards the once very friendly relations between the Persians and the Jews, and which stands to happen again, because as I said earlier, the vast majority of the Iranian people actually are friendly and favorable to Israel, as opposed to this regime that's doing everything it can to keep away a direct attack against Tehran, against the regime's nuclearizing desire to take over the Middle East through their nuclear program, as well as their program of subversion around the region.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
All right, Amos, let me come back to you. If Iran is not confronted, how far will their chutzpah go? Why, and why, in effect, is Iran so far afraid from getting directly involved in the confrontation? The U.S. and its allies are directly involved. How long can Iran stay out of the fray directly?
I think that their effort is to deploy non-Iranians, anyone from Afghanis to Yemenis and other Arabs, except not themselves. They do not. They're very wisely refraining from conscripting and deploying young Iranians for all these efforts. But their test will come when their ability to enlist non-Iranians will run out. And I think that we're approaching such a moment, because if you're now an Afghan, for instance, out there who is their intended conscript or enlisted man, you increasingly have reason to suspect that you're going to be killed fighting for them in one of these Middle Eastern lands, and they will increasingly find it difficult to enlist such people, and then the need will grow for them to enlist for this purpose Iranians. But that will come at a social cost. Opposition to this inside Iran, first and foremost among the prospective conscripts, will grow. People don't want to go and fight for these kinds of causes, for this kind of regime. So I think that they realize this, the Iranians, and that will temper their desire to keep going to further targets and to more ambitious goals. If we understand, it's difficult to understand, but if we understand where their strategy wants to lead, some believe, and I think with good reason, that their ultimate aim is an overland bridge from Tehran to Beirut, which would effectively unfurl a Persian-led, Shiite-dominated empire that stretches into the Mediterranean. This is possibly the aim. I think that this aim, with current events unfolding the way they are, this aim is becoming distant increasingly for them to accomplish. This is besides the fact that had they actually been that close to achieving this goal of reaching Mediterranean shores and owning them, that would have provoked also the Russians, which are currently their allies. So I think that the broader Iranian quest is very problematic from the Iranian viewpoint, never mind our viewpoint, and very unrealistic. And increasingly, more and more people within Iran will understand that it is both unattainable and unaffordable, besides, of course, being illogical.
All right, Dan, let me come back to you about the internal situation in Iran one last time. The Iranian regime is heartless and bloodthirsty. They've murdered and imprisoned Iranian opposition with impunity. Do the Iranian people have the required courage, and it would require a lot of courage, to rise up and win their freedom?
Steve, you saw the what's called the Massa Revolution, which hails back over a year and a half ago, to when Massa Amini, as I mentioned before, this young woman was murdered by the regime, but that triggered the demonstration and protestations of millions of Iranians across many Iranian cities who actually risked their lives in order to confront the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Basij, which are, hundreds of thousands of Iranian, not paramilitary, but people that identify and fight these brutal gangs that fight on behalf of the regime. Well, these people have actually been turned back to a large degree, and there are only tens of thousands of Basij that have come out recently during protests and demonstrations. It's very clear to the Iranian people that they are the solution to the Iranian regime problem. But and they have the courage and the political will to do it. What the Iranian people are looking for, though, are tangible, concrete signs of assistance from the outside world, led by the United States and its allies, that they would have the backs of the Iranian people if they were to trigger through major civil unrest, the labor unions and other organizations within Iran, a move to begin to turn against this regime. But an additional point, Steve, it's not only what's going on inside Iran. People watching this program from the West have reason to be concerned because the IRGC has mobilized hundreds of thousands of Shiite Muslims in Britain to spy on Jews in Great Britain. The Iranian regime has attempted to assassinate former American senior officials like John Bolton, the former national security advisor to the United States and the UN ambassador. They planned to assassinate Mike Pompeo. They planned to assassinate up to 20 people in Great Britain in the last year and 3 quarters alone. They are all over Latin America. So people in the West who are watching this program, who think that Iran is only an issue far off in the Middle East, away from their daily reality, simply have got to understand that the long tentacles of the Iranian regime are reaching into the United States, are reaching throughout Latin America, are reaching across Europe. They are at the doorstep of the West, and the West has got to lead in order to cut off all the tentacles of the Iranian regime.
Amos, back closer at home, until now, Israel has shied away from a full second front against Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon. But that could soon change in the coming days as the Gaza war perhaps winds down. Would an Israeli ground operation into Lebanon force Iran to respond directly, do you think?
No, not at all. They're very cautious. We've seen that effectively play out back in the Second Lebanon War, and in which the confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah was full-blown, and the Iranians were careful not to intervene directly. And although most of the protagonists have since changed, I think the strategic realities and the strategic thinking on both sides of this equation would be the same that we saw back then, and that the Iranians would be careful not to come and participate themselves. And they surely realize that if they do that, this would be the wholesale gamble, after which they might lose their very grip on power.
Steve, but a very important point to add to what Amot said here, a very important point. For the Iranian regime, the Iranian ruled Hezbollah. The Iranian ruled, supplied, financed, inspired Hezbollah is their insurance policy. It was the Hezbollah that was formed in the early 1980s, shortly after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and it is their forward base in southern Lebanon with with over 150,000 rockets and laser-guided missiles and drones, and so on, not only threatening Israel from the north, but a major regional forward base.
Well, Dan,
if that were to be
I just wanted to sharpen the question for you, Dan. There are so many fronts, all led by Iran. Can Israel handle it alone, or we need more help from the U.S.? Maybe a U.S.-led alliance for the long term that includes Israel and Saudi Arabia. I know you like that idea, but what is the U.S. price tag? And if the price tag is acceptance of a demilitarized Palestinian state, is it still worth it?
The most important thing, Steve, is to understand the correct paradigm here. The correct paradigm, which I'm unsure that and unconfident that the United States shares, beginning with the Obama administration, continuing into the Biden administration, has held that the Iranian regime, in their view, is more the solution than it is the problem. They are looking at the problem, and I believe incorrectly, closer to Israel's borders, where they think that a demilitarized Palestinian state would be an anchor of peace and security that would essentially calm the fears of those that believe that the Iranian regime, anger, instability, and subversion would somehow be relieved and calmed down. The actual problem is the opposite. The Iranian regime and its dedication to strangling Israel and all of the other, what they call the near enemies, which are the Sunni countries that are, believe me, they are as oppositional to Iran even more than Israel. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Morocco and Egypt, and others and other states across the region are as deeply concerned about Iran's growing race for regional supremacy under a nuclear umbrella. So can Israel do it alone? Well, Israel is right now cutting off one of the main tentacles of the Iranian octopus in Gaza. It has the full capability of flattening Lebanon that is dominated by Hezbollah if it has to. But clearly the United States' massive military power and capabilities across the region would be necessary to decapitate the Iranian regime, in my view.
Well, a perfect timing, Dan, as always. We're just now out of time, unfortunately. It's all the time we have for this evening, but thank you so much to our guests, Amos El and Dr. Dan Diker. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv. Thank you to our viewers. I'm Steve Liebowitz. Let's win the war and bring them home.